Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Energy and Transportation. I'm joined by Andy Crawshaw of Groundsure this morning, who's going to look at, with ever increasing updates, we're going to take a look at the very latest situation in respect to the UK's energy and transportation infrastructure. Before I hand over to Andy, I'd just like to draw your attention to your Zoom software. And I'd ask that if you've got questions as we go through today's webinar, to use the Q&A button at the bottom rather than the chat functionality. Any questions that you type in there, we will then endeavour to answer at the end of the session rather than as we go through the session. So we'll come back to questions at the end. Andy, I will now hand over to you to conduct today's webinar. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. And yeah, thank you everybody for joining us today. As I'm sure is the case for a lot of you, I do have my children at home with me. So apologies in advance if you can hear them tearing shreds out of each other in the background. But we've got quite a bit to get through, so I will crack on anyway. So last week, as Britain, we passed a significant landmark. As of midnight on Wednesday, the 10th of June, we had gone 2 full months without burning coal to generate power. A decade ago, about 40% of the country's electricity came from coal. COVID-19 is part of the story, but far from all of it. When Britain went into lockdown, electricity demand plummeted. The national grid responded by taking power plants off the network, and the 4 remaining coal-fired plants were among the first to be shut down. The last coal generator came off the system at midnight on the 9th of April, and no coal has been burned for electricity since. The current coal-free period smashes the previous record of 18 days, 6 hours and 10 minutes, which was set in June last year. Now the UK has the biggest offshore wind industry in the world, as well as the largest single wind farm completed off the coast of Yorkshire last year. At the same time, Drax, which is the country's biggest power plant, has been taking a different path to renewable energy. The plant, which is also in Yorkshire, generates 5% of the country's electricity. So what are non-renewables in terms of energy? So all fossil fuels formed in a similar way. Hundreds of millions of years ago, even before the dinosaurs, Earth had a different landscape. It was covered with wide, shallow seas and swampy forests. Plants, algae and plankton grew in these ancient wetlands. They absorbed sunlight and created energy through photosynthesis. When they died, the organisms drifted to the bottom of the sea or lake. There was energy stored in the plants and animals when they died, and over time, the dead plants were crushed under the seabed. Rocks and other sediment piled on top of them, creating high heat and pressure underground. In this environment, the plant and animal remains eventually turned into fossil fuels, so coal, natural gas and petroleum. Today, there are huge underground pockets of these non-renewable sources of energy all over the world. Fossil fuels are a valuable source of energy. They are relatively inexpensive to extract, and they can be stored, piped or shipped anywhere in the world. However, burning fossil fuels is harmful for the environment. When coal and oil are burned, they release particles that can pollute the air, water and land. Some of these particles are caught and set aside, but many of them are released into the air. So just 4 coal plants remain in the UK today. These are Drax in North Yorkshire that I mentioned, Radcliffe in Nottinghamshire, West Burton in Lincolnshire and Kilroot in Northern Ireland. Out of these, Drax has confirmed that it will close its coal units after September 2022 and does not expect to use coal after March 2021. Kilroot has won a contract to support the conversion of the plant to burn gas instead of coal by winter 2023. Only Radcliffe and West Burton are yet to announce any closure plans. The onshore oil and gas industry in the UK has been in existence for over 150 years. Before the First World War, the UK imported almost all of its oil and gas. And during both World Wars, the need for Britain to produce its own oil to help the war effort became an urgent priority for the UK government, and legislation was introduced to enable companies to explore for hydrocarbons more readily. Onshore oil and gas activity started to accelerate again after the 1979 oil crisis in the wake of the Iranian Revolution. As oil prices rose sharply, domestic production became increasingly important. In the UK, there are now 120 onshore oil and gas sites with 250 operating wells, producing between 20,000 and 25,000 barrels of oil equivalent a day. UK oil and gas is operating primarily in the Weald Basin in southeast England, which has a long tradition of oil and gas exploration. There are 13 producing sites in the Weald, some almost 30 years old. There are 15 nuclear reactors located over 8 sites within the UK, and I'll go through that a bit later on. And at the minute, there is only one active fracking site in the UK, which is currently impacted by a temporary moratorium. The site is operated by Quadrilla and is located near Blackpool. So which farm in Dorset is in the heart of an area of outstanding natural beauty? But you would be forgiven for not knowing that the largest oil field in Western Europe is even there. Nestled in a pine forest near a nature reserve and on islands just off Poole Harbour, the oil field owned by French company Perenco has been quietly producing thousands of barrels a day since the late 1970s by means of a form of fracking called water injection, also known as water flooding. At one point, the oil field had the longest horizontal drill in the world and has regularly pumped water into wells to fracture the rock and force out oil and gas. Academics say that this so-called fracking has been used on 200 wells across the UK over the last 20 years or so. So it was discovered in 1973, and Wytch Farm has estimated reserves of 500 million barrels of oil. It is the largest onshore oil field in Europe and ranks in the top 10 UK oil fields, including those offshore. Output from this field dwarfs production from the other onshore fields. A similar picture also emerges for gas production, where onshore production is again dominated by the Wessex Basin Wytch Farm field. The oil field has had very little impact on the area, and many tourists don't even know it's there. There have never been any seismic events at Wytch Farm, and whilst the process used here are a form of fracking, they are not the same as the hydraulic fracturing that is being proposed elsewhere in the country. Property prices remain unaffected, and as I'm sure you've heard of sandbanks, you can understand that is very true, and it is one of the most expensive places to live in the UK. Fracking is not a new technology. It first happened in Lincolnshire in 1988. What's new is the proposed scale of what oil companies are trying to do. So the Infrastructure Act of 2015 simplifies the procedure for obtaining the right to use underground land 300 metres and below for the purpose of exploiting oil and gas and deep geothermal energy. Essentially, an automatic right of access is given to this depth level. This means that surface landowners will no longer be able to unduly object to or frustrate initiatives on the basis of works amounting to trespass. In addition, there is the right to leave the deep level land in a different condition than before the right was exercised. This includes by leaving any substance or infrastructure in the land. Liability for any loss or damage attributable to the exercise of these rights by another person is expressly removed from resting with the landowner. The regulations that define the protected areas in which hydraulic fracturing is prohibited ensure that the process of hydraulic fracturing can only take place below 1,200 metres in specified groundwater areas, national parks, areas of outstanding natural beauty, and World Heritage sites. So is the future nuclear? It's an epic feat of engineering that is transforming the landscape and local housing markets in equal measure, which is the Hinkley Point C nuclear power plant in Somerset. The UK has built 19 nuclear power stations from 1956 onwards, and nuclear now contributes 19% of all the UK's electricity, and it is projected to rise to a third by 2035. More significantly, 7 of the 8 nuclear sites will have shut by the end of the 2020s as they reach the end of their lifetime, with only Sizewell B in Suffolk continuing to operate. In 2008, the UK government announced the dawn of a new nuclear age, and in 2010 it identified 8 sites suitable for future nuclear power stations on existing sites, including Hinkley Point, Sizewell, but also Bradwell, Moorside, Wilfer and Oldbury. Of these, only Hinkley is under construction, which will power around 6 million homes when complete. The power station is officially due to begin supplying electricity to the grid in 2025, but similar projects in Finland and France have run many years over schedule. EDF have already warned that the plant may not be generating until 2027. The Hinkley project will cost around £20 billion, and there are currently 1,700 workers on site, with 5,600 at the peak before the build is set to complete in 2025. Some 5.6 million cubic metres of earth is being moved to make room for 230,000 tonnes of steel. Around 900 people will work there full-time from the mid-2020s, when it will generate 7% of the UK's electricity requirements. But how is this having an impact on the wider area? So nearby there are only small towns such as Minehead with a population of 12,000, Bridgewater with 36,000 people there, and Taunton with 61,000 people. This part of the West Country, sandwiched between Quantock Hills and the Mendips, is beautiful in parts, yet has little of the romance or sailing tradition that characterise much of the rest of the region. There is also little development by the water, at least partly because the ageing and ugly Hinkley Point B power station, which was built between 1967 and 1976, has hardly been conducive to attracting developers or second home buyers. Now, a wider area of North Somerset, for good or for bad, is about to undergo a transformation thanks to this latest plant. Values are already rising rapidly in locations near Hinkley Point C. According to Zoopla, Minehead prices rose 3.7% in the last year, with Taunton up 6.6% and Bridgewater seeing a rise of 7.6%. This is despite EDF itself building temporary accommodation units for 1,500 workers, helping to ease some of the housing shortage supply. Investors are now flocking to the area. Most agents say the long-term appeal of the area and the growing population mean that once the plant is up and running, even the current glut of new accommodation can be absorbed. Between now and then, however, there will be blight issues for some. Some communities will be irritated by the problems that always plague such projects, such as contractors parking off-site and increased traffic, and air pollution as a result of the huge number of HGVs. Some problems may go on even after the plant is operational. However, some believe that short-term pain may actually produce long-term gain for most in the area, despite the presence of what will be one of the world's largest nuclear power plants. The streets of North Somerset might not quite be paved with gold, but for some at least, they appear to be benefiting from the proximity of uranium. So, at the moment, 44% of our gas comes from UK production. 47% of the gas we use comes via pipelines from Europe and Norway. The remaining 9% comes into the UK by tankers in the form of liquefied natural gas. 80% of the UK's 25 million homes are powered by gas, and around a quarter of the country's electricity is generated by gas-fired power stations. Gas plants are on the most flexible ways to generate electricity, as they can rapidly provide power during periods of high demand. As the amount of gas that can be extracted from the North Sea declines, we'll need to import more to ensure a regular and reliable supply to the UK. Forecasts show that gas will remain an important energy source for heating and electricity for UK homes for many decades, and UK government policy supports the creation of underground gas storage facilities as a means of achieving a secure energy supply. Storing gas in cavities is nothing new, and it has been safely stored in cavities in Hullfield brine fields since the late 1980s. This Keuper project would involve using specially designed underground salt cavities created through solution mining to store natural gas. Over 200 cavities have already been developed at the site for brine production, 19 of which are currently in use for gas storage, with a further 10 in development. The Keuper project would involve using up to 19 cavities in total, together with a gas processing plant and associated infrastructure, including brine and water infrastructure and connections to the UK's existing gas network. So the rocks from this area are part of the Mercia Mudstone Group from the Triassic era, some 251 to 199 million years ago. Of particular interest is the Northwich halite member of both mudstones and rock salt. The former name of this rock sequence was the Lower Keuper Saliferous Beds, overlain by the Middle Keuper Marl. So the name Keuper has a long association with the rocks of this area and the Holfield Brinefield. The Northwich site was originally founded in the early 1930s and produces brine, which is an essential building block for the production of plastics, water treatment chemicals, and other chemical intermediaries and gas and food grade salt production. Each year, around 2.5 million tons of salt are extracted. So, if anything is flagged in one of our reports, for power stations in particular, we would recommend visiting the power station operator's website for further information. Many power stations have large amounts of information on their local impacts available from the operator's website. Additionally, you could contact the air quality team of the local authority, which may hold additional information regarding any air quality impacts in the area. For oil and gas, again, you can visit the operator's website, and you can also visit the area in order to more accurately assess the impact this extraction site would have on the property. Using the detail within our report, we recommend further research into the planning applications identified to determine exactly what is proposed. Information, again, is likely to be obtainable from the local authority website. And for energy projects, you can visit the National Infrastructure Planning website, where further details on nationally significant infrastructure projects, including environmental impact assessments, can be found. So having a look, sorry mate, I'm still on. So having a look at renewables, and renewable energy, often referred to as clean energy, comes from natural sources or processes that are constantly replenished. For example, sunlight or wind keeps shining and blowing, even if their availability depends on time and weather. While renewable energy is often thought of as a new technology, harnessing nature's power has long been used for heating, transportation, lighting, and more. Wind has powered boats to sail the seas and windmills to grind grain. The sun has provided warmth during the day and helped kindle fires to last into the evening. But over the past 500 years or so, humans increasingly turned to cheaper, dirtier energy sources such as coal and fracked gas. In the UK at the moment, there are just over 8,500 onshore wind turbines across over 2,500 projects, with an additional 2,000 offshore turbines over 37 projects. There's 1,100 operational solar installations, and we have 73 operational hydro, tidal barrage, tidal stream schemes. There's 2 in England, 67 in Scotland, and 4 in Wales. 2020 was expected to see the renewable energy sector continue its strong growth worldwide, with many new projects expected to come online or begin construction, along with many innovative plans due to be launched. Faircroft, a specialist recruitment firm, has compiled a list of the 10 biggest, most valuable renewable energy projects to watch for in 2020, 2 of which were based in the UK. The UK also hosts 7 of the 10 biggest wind farms in Europe. Whilst the majority of these are located offshore, there are a few which feature onshore. These are the Whiteley Wind Farm, which can power up to 300,000 homes a year, and the Clyde Wind Farm, which powers up to 290,000 homes a year, both of which are located in Scotland. Now, Triton Knoll is an offshore wind project located 20 miles off the coast of Lincolnshire. It covers a 12-mile area and will contain up to 90 turbines. The project has been ongoing for several years, having originally been planned back in 2003. Following a series of delays, it achieved financial close in August 2018, and in January this year it was confirmed that construction had finally begun. It is estimated that at least 800,000 households will be powered by Triton Knoll. Triton Knoll is within the Greater Wash strategic area, located off the east coast of England, approximately 20 miles off the coast of Lincolnshire and 28 miles from the coast of North Norfolk. This is one of the 3 Round 2 strategic areas around the coast of Great Britain, which were released for offshore wind development by the Crown Estate and the government in 2003. Once constructed, offshore and onshore electrical infrastructure will connect the wind farm to the electricity network. Subsea export cables from the offshore wind farm will make landfall just north of Anderby Creek, with the power entering the electricity network at Bicker Fen substation near Boston via a network of underground cabling. There are very different viewpoints on the effects wind farms have on property values. Whilst these studies are becoming older, there are still only valid studies that have been conducted. The London School of Economics said in 2014 they produced a paper called Gone with the Wind, and they found that wind farms can have an effect on property prices, and that if there is a wind farm within 2 kilometres of property, it could cause a value's property to fall by as much as 12%. The Centre for Economics and Business Research in the same year found that house prices were not influenced by their proximity to wind farms, and concluded that findings say that being close to a wind farm may not lower a property's value, and that it is quite inconclusive. Basically, from the 2 papers, it says it depends how many turbines are there, it depends how far away it is, and it depends if you can see it. However, there was a homeowner in Devon whose house was around 650 yards away from a wind farm, and they managed to downgrade their council tax band group, saving over £400 a year, because they felt the wind farm had negatively impacted their enjoyment of their property. And they felt that also they had lost around £100,000 in their home's value, although they weren't trying to sell it at the time. The decision was granted by the Valuation Office on the basis that their property fell in estimated value from £400,000 to £300,000. The homeowners argued that the wind farm was causing a persistent whooshing noise and was also causing visual intrusion as a result of flicker, and this is when the wind turbines catches the sunlight. The decisions by the Valuation Office agency to move certain houses close to wind farms into lower council tax bands are the first official recognition that the turbines can lower the value of nearby homes. This is Howbury Business Park in Oxfordshire, and it's the first large ground system of its kind to feed into the national grid. It could also be one of the last of its kind for some time, following the recent review and cuts to the feed-in tariff scheme. Howbury Business Park is one of only a few business parks in the UK where occupiers are able to secure a direct electricity supply from a solar array. The business park companies specialise in engineering, environmental and water research and development. The park has 3,000 solar panels generating a quarter of the business park's electricity needs. And then having a look at the Sunniker Energy Farm. This is being proposed for construction on land close to the villages of Wallington, Chippenham and Snailwell on the border between West Suffolk and Cambridgeshire. The facility potential would be made up of solar panels spread across an area of 1,500 hectares and is expected to be able to supply around 100,000 homes with electricity. Due to its generating capacity, it is classified as a nationally significant infrastructure project, meaning no planning permission is needed from local councils. Instead, the decision will be made by the Planning Inspectorate on behalf of the Secretary of State. If approved, construction could begin in 2022, with completion of the site scheduled for 2025. And if they build it, the scheme would allow for the generation, storage, import and export of up to 500 megawatts of power. Groundshore's reports are the only reports on the market which will include all of the proposed energy projects registered with the Planning Inspectorate. And then in terms of wind and solar energy, if it is flagged within one of our reports, you can use the details given in the report to find out more about the potential impacts on the property. You can contact the operating company and the relevant local authority for further information, and also visit the area to more accurately assess the impact this wind development would have on the property. As we move on to transportation, and HS2 is something that is, well, it used to be constantly in the news and something new used to be flagging up, but it is a new high-speed railway linking up London, the Midlands and the North, serving 8 of Britain's 10 largest cities. Phase 1 will open between 2029 and 2033, or it's supposed to, and it will run from London to Birmingham over 134 miles through 31 miles of tunnels and over 10 miles of viaducts, trains with more seats. Phase 2 will extend the route to Manchester and Leeds by adding 209 miles through 15 miles of tunnel and on 28 miles of viaduct. Once operational, HS2 will serve over 25 stations, connecting around 30 million people, and it will significantly improve connectivity in the North and Midlands, and will also integrate with the existing network serving stations into Scotland, creating 500,000 extra jobs and 90,000 homes around HS2 stations. There are 3 main benefits of HS2. So the connectivity, which I mentioned, and the better transport links between our cities and regions, hopefully bringing more investment to the Midlands and the North and helping to level up the country. Also, the capacity, taking intercity trains off the existing rail network, will free up more space for commuter and freight services, helping to relieve the overcrowding and take lorries off the road. And also for carbon, HS2 will be the low carbon option for long distance travel, emitting 17 times less carbon than the equivalent domestic flight and 7 times less carbon than the equivalent car journey. The cost of HS2 seems to be continually increasing. When the idea was first raised, the government said it would cost £32 billion, when in fact that number currently, from what they say, is nearer to £56 billion. In even more recent reviews, it is likely that this number will increase further, as phase 1 alone is likely to cost £48 billion. And the OKV review I'll look at on the next slide, but obviously that number has pretty much doubled. It's fair to say that these numbers don't really speak for themselves, and not even HS2 seem to know the true cost of the scheme. HS2 Limited have already spent £4.1 billion before any real construction has started. This includes around £1.7 billion on acquiring land and property. And at the end of July of 2018, 492 properties had been acquired via schemes such as statutory blight, discretionary schemes and private agreements. There were another 165 properties that were purchased via compulsory purchase, covering 739 properties interest. It's estimated that for phase 1 alone, HS2 Limited will need to acquire approximately 70 square kilometres, more than 17,000 acres of land along the route of the railway. So given the news focus elsewhere over the last few months, it would be pretty easy to miss the announcement by the government on the 15th of April that they have issued a notice to proceed for phase 1 of HS2. This means that contractors have formal approval for the main construction works to begin, following the decision in February to proceed with the project. Whilst much of the preparatory work has been underway since 2017, notably in Birmingham, the main companies involved in the project expect contractors to be on site later this year or early next year to start delivering the project. This is unrelated to COVID-19 lockdown restrictions. The notice to proceed means that contracts with strategic delivery partners can be signed and uncertainty removed from the project rather than leading to the immediate breaking of the ground. But how much is it actually going to cost? When, as I said, the project was first mooted in 2009, a company called HS2 Limited was set up by the Department for Transport, and since then the costs have been ever increasing. And after the OCA review that we saw earlier this year, it was suggested that the expected cost in total of the project would be around £106 billion, more than 3 times the cost that was on the original budget. It is likely that there will be some kind of uplift for properties in the vicinity of HS2 hubs and stations. However, it's unlikely that the effect would be so pronounced as the 30 to 60% uplift reported from around Crossrail stations, given that Crossrail is opening up easy commuting in the very heated London property market. HS2's own research indicates that they expect 70% of their passengers to be leisure passengers, as opposed to using it for business travel and commuting. The more sporadically a customer is likely to use the service, the less likely it is that significant premiums will be commanded, whereas Crossrail services will be used very much more on a day-to-day basis. Passengers can already commute to London from Birmingham in less than an hour and a quarter on a good day, although it does mean that the commute from Birmingham becomes less than an hour each way, which overcomes a certain psychological feasibility barrier in people's minds. There's already a premium applied to properties in a 10 to 15 minute walk away of a commutable station, as we see in Brighton down here very, very clearly. So that might not change as significantly, given that the properties are already in close proximity to main rail stations. Also, the majority of properties for sale in close proximity to the HS2 hub in Birmingham are new luxury flats, which were already being sold at something of a premium, so the effect may be less marked on that front too. However, another benefit to the new existing properties in the HS2 hub areas may well be the regeneration that should go hand in hand with the HS2 infrastructure, as well as the line itself. One often overlooked aspect of HS2 is that the trains will not just be running on the proposed new HS2 line, but also connecting with existing railway lines to give HS2 services much further afield than is commonly thought. For example, phase 1 of HS2 will allow high-speed trains to run all the way to Glasgow by connecting to the existing West Coast Main Line, cutting nearly an hour of the journey time to London. Whilst the high-speed trains won't run at the speed seen on the new HS2 track when on existing rail tracks, they're still very much part of the network, and properties in proximity may see a small uplift as a result. Other cities are not on the new HS2 line, but will benefit from the connecting to the network. These include Liverpool, Newcastle, Edinburgh, York, and Sheffield. The additional benefit for these areas is that by using existing infrastructure, there won't be as much associated disruption and potential devaluation due to the construction works. This connected network will affect even more people than the primary HS2 network. So in conclusion, yes, there is likely to be a modest uplift in property values in proximity to HS2 connected stations, though not on the scale seen in proximity to Crossrail. The uplift will probably be more pronounced in the main HS2 hub areas, but should also be seen to a smaller degree in far more areas than people may imagine. Our analysis here at Groundsure confirms that there are over 100,000 residential properties within 1 kilometre of the confirmed main HS2 hubs alone, with a further 178,000 within 1 kilometre of the stations on the connected network. So if one of our reports identifies HS2 in proximity to the property you're looking at for your client, you can consider obtaining a further professional assessment in order to obtain more detailed information of the effects it is likely that the property will experience. Further information on these assessments can be found on the HS2 website, or you can email HS2 directly. If the property is within a safeguarding or compensation area, you should fully investigate the implications of buying a property within these areas. If living near a depot or line, operational noise could be disruptive and should be considered before purchase. And the HS2 route is still subject to change, so further investigation and consideration of this should be made. So the information we have and the data that we have here at Groundsure, it'll include all active national rail lines across the country. Included are other light rail or tramways such as the Croydon Tramlink, other tram lines, and we even have the information for some roller coasters on there. We have data on funicular railways such as the Cairngorm funicular, plus lots of historical and abandoned railways and tunnels. On your screen is an example of a section of tunnel, part of the Liverpool overhead railway that collapsed. 11 houses were declared unsafe after the disused railway tunnel in Dingle collapsed in July 2012, and a survey undertaken by Liverpool City Council could not confirm the cause of the collapse in the tunnel, which runs for 0.7 miles under Dingle. And these are the Williamson Tunnels, which you might have heard of, but these are a series of extensive subterranean excavations of unknown purpose in the Edgehill area of Liverpool. They are thought to have been created under the direction of tobacco merchant, landowner and philanthropist Joseph Williamson between 1810 and 1840. These tunnels predate historical mapping, and therefore once here at Groundsure we were made aware of them by a client, we researched their location and added them to our historical tunnels dataset. The purpose of the excavations has been the subject of widespread speculation. According to Stonehouse's near contemporary account, Williamson was secretive about his motives, leading to a great detail of speculative local folklore. Upon hearing that Stonehouse planned to publish his research on Williamson's excavations, Williamson's friend, the artist Cornelius Henderson, threatened to sue Stonehouse both for libel and trespass, leading to the paper's suppression for some years. The most commonly related explanation is that they were a philanthropic endeavour. Williamson's own explanation was reputed to be that his motive was the employment of the poor. His workers all received a weekly wage and were thus enabled to enjoy the blessings of charity without the attendant curse of stifled self-respect. Certain features of the tunnels appear to support this theory. There are many architectural features that seem unnecessarily decorative, hidden deep below the ground in chambers that would likely have been dimly lit and rarely seen. By way of example, at the Mason Street site, a beautifully constructed stone arch was recently uncovered in an otherwise plainly constructed side chamber, deep underground, with no obvious explanation for its purpose. These features could be interpreted as Williamson helping his employees improve their skills. Another suggestion that he was a member of an extremist religious sect, fearing that the end of the world was near and that the tunnels were built to provide refuge for himself and his friends, originated in recent times with a casual suggestion made on a television programme. No evidence has been found to support the existence of such a sect or that Williamson, who was a practicing member of the Church of England, belonged to one. Stonehouse and Hand both felt the excavations were simply the largely purposeless folly of an eccentric man. However, while Stonehouse called the work stupendously useless, Hand concluded that Williamson's philanthropic purpose was a noble one and felt he should have been both pleased and proud to have known him. Many of Williamson's workers were said to have later found employment in railway construction with the skills they had learned. More recent research by the academics at Edgehill University has concluded that the tunnels were in fact a result of work by Williamson to restore ground levels after quarrying. Most of the excavations are directly within a band of high-quality sandstone and show clear signs of having been carried out using established quarrying techniques designed to produce single large pieces of stone suitable for building use. In addition, the cross-section of the works produced by the 1881 survey reveal a typical stone quarry profile. The apparently aimless nature of these excavations was likely a reflection of the work following the best seam of stone, avoiding imperfections and master joints. The tunnels had therefore originally been unregulated slot quarries for sandstone, used for prestige buildings in the rapidly expanding Liverpool of the Georgian area, and by subsequently vaulting them over, Williamson was able to restore ground levels, facilitating his extensive housing developments on the site. So another line as well is the Post Office Underground Railway in London, or the Mail Rail, which transported mail under the streets of London from 1927 to 2003. By the turn of the 20th century, congested streets and fog meant that mail transported between the main post office and railway stations in London was severely delayed. A departmental committee was set up in 1909 to study the use of underground pneumatic and electric railways. In February 1911, it recommended construction of an electric railway with driverless trains. Their recommendations were accepted, and in 1913, the Post Office Railway Bill was passed as an act. The new railway was to consist of 6.5 miles of tunnels at an average of 70 feet below ground. It would connect the west and east ends of London with 8 stations, and construction began on the tunnels in 1914, and at the same time, a short experimental track, complete with 1 car, was erected on Plumstead Marshes. The tunnelling work was completed in 1917, but the Treasury would not allow the Post Office to order or install the operating equipment during wartime. The high price of materials after the war meant that work on the railway did not resume until 1923. The railway was finally opened on the 5th of December 1927, with parcels traffic running between Mount Pleasant and Paddington. The trains run in a single tunnel, 9 feet in diameter, with a double 2-foot gauge track. At the station approaches, the main tunnel divides into 2 7-foot tunnels, each with a single track. And although the trains are much smaller than on London's passenger underground, the stations look much the same, with grand circular walls and the familiar sound of the approaching trains. The tunnels were used during the First World War to store and protect art treasures belonging to the National Portrait Gallery and the Tate Gallery. Now, the London Underground itself was the world's first underground railway. It dates back to 1863, when the Metropolitan line was constructed and served between Paddington and Farringdon. Commonly known as the Tube, it consists of 402 kilometres of track over 11 lines through 270 operational stations. Despite it being called the London Underground, 55% of the network lies above the ground. The majority of the central London network was completed in its first 50 years through cut and cover tunnels along existing thoroughfares. It wasn't until the turn of the 20th century and the introduction of electric traction that development turned deep underground. The Tube makes around 1.2 billion journeys per year, which is around 4 million journeys per day. And living in close proximity to either the underground line, tram or railway line can have possible negative effects on property in the form of operational noise and vibration. Under Section 122 of the Railways Act of 1993, rail operators and London Underground are immune from nuisance legislation regarding operational noise and vibration. Parliament has also always recognised that railway operation can give rise to a degree of unavoidable noise and disturbance. For this reason, the Act provides network rail and train operators with statutory defence to proceedings for nuisance. Ordinarily, this would cover claims alleging excessive noise or vibration. However, the defence is not unqualified. If the complaint refers to noise from railway premises, the operator must demonstrate that they have used reasonable due diligence to control the noise or vibration if they are to claim the statutory immunity defence. This applies, for example, to allegations of nuisance from a platform loudspeaker or from a lift or plant room causing noise or vibration. Also in London, Crossrail is among the most significant infrastructure projects ever undertaken in the UK. From improving journey times across London to easing congestion and offering better connections, Elizabeth Line will change the way that people travel around the capital. Crossrail Limited is delivering the Elizabeth line running from Reading and Heathrow in the west through 42 kilometres of new tunnels under London to Shenfield and Abbey Wood in the east. The Crossrail project is currently Europe's largest infrastructure project, and the new railway will be fully integrated with London's existing transport network with around 200 million annual passengers, and it will serve 41 stations, including 10 new stations. Over 130 million working hours have been completed on the Crossrail project so far. Research undertaken by property consultants GVA show that the Elizabeth line is a major catalyst for regeneration across London and the South East. There's just over 90,000 new homes along the route to be built by the end of next year and 180,000 by 2026. Crossrail 2 is a new proposed railway link connecting Surrey and Hertfordshire via an underground tunnel through London again. Crossrail 2 marks the next step in the country's ambition to improve rail infrastructure and join major countries to the capital. The new railway would stop at key locations throughout the city, including Tottenham Court Road, Euston, St Pancras, Victoria, Clapham Junction and Wimbledon, improving access to and from London and linking up major rail infrastructure projects such as HS2 and the Elizabeth line. It is hoped that Crossrail 2 could be operational by the 2030s, but they are in the very early stages of planning and no decision has actually been made to build as yet. For all major projects such as these, land is required for the scheme, not only for where the scheme will go, but also construction areas around said scheme. The government can also issue compulsory purchase orders for homes and business premises close to the schemes. And one thing we will notify you on in our reports is whether or not the property falls within or is in close to a safeguarding area. Safeguarding areas do not protect the property within them, they protect the scheme from any future development which could delay or restrict the project. It would not be wise to purchase property within these areas. Safeguarding may impact you and will do so differently depending on whether you are a local authority, developer, or a land or property owner. Safeguarding does not mean that your property or business will definitely be affected by the new underground railway or overground railway or whatever's being built. The direction issued by the Department for Transport in March 2015 require local planning authorities to consult Transport for London on planning applications within the boundaries shown on the safeguarding plans before granting planning approval. As well as helping to protect the land needed to build and operate the railway, the safeguarding direction also triggers statutory blight. This means that the property owners and occupiers within the safeguarded areas may be eligible to serve a blight notice asking Transport for London to buy their property prior to it being needed for construction for the price it would be worth if Crossrail 2 was not being built. Safeguarding requires local planning authorities to consult TfL when they are considering planning applications within the area that has been safeguarded. The local planning authority will then be advised on how to respond to the application. In most cases, there will be no comment or certain conditions must be resolved before work on the development starts. Very rarely, the local or planning authority will be instructed to refuse the planning application. So if the report identifies rail infrastructure, most underground and DLR lines operate without any disruption to properties above or in proximity. However, a purchaser may wish to visit the property at different times of the day just to gauge the relative noise and vibration levels which may result from normal operations. I always liken it to if you're buying a property near a pub, you'd always go and have a look at kick-out time on a Friday and Saturday night to see what sort of disruption you've got. It's also noteworthy that many historical railways noted in this section will still be in use today. Abandoned railways have the potential to be reopened in the future, and abandoned tunnels can also pose ground stability issues if a property basement is to be developed. You can obtain further details on the potential impact of Crossrail 2, the location of Crossrail 2 works, the development schedule and property schemes on the Crossrail website, or by contacting the land and property team there. And for Crossrail 1, you can always, again, ensure that structural surveys of the property consider the potential for vibration, and any sort of settlement to have caused structural damage to the property, and also make inquiries of the seller to determine whether a pre-construction survey was carried out at the property by Crossrail themselves. Just very quickly to let you know, we do offer 2 residential reports that will cover everything that I've spoken about today. That's our standalone energy and transportation report, and all of that information is also included in our Avista report, which is our all-in-one residential environmental report that covers everything that I've mentioned, as well as full flood, contaminated land, ground stability, and radon. That's everything from me. Thank you very much for your time today. I'll pass you back to Adam now.
Andy, thank you very much. Andy, just one question actually that's come up, which I'm hoping you can answer. I'll read it to you. It's, when raising pre-contracting inquiries, what sort of issues should we be looking to identify and raise with the seller in respect of nearby energy infrastructure and transportation links, other than distance and any nuisance or annoyance they may have suffered because of them?
I would have said that covers everything that you should be asking. In terms of what you asked the seller, then absolutely what sort of nuisance that they've had from them and how far away it is. Everything else will be covered within our reports or other reports that show exactly who the provider is, what they're planning to do there. So is it conventional oil and gas, or is it something else that they're looking at? And also to visit the operator's website, as I said, because they'll have a lot more information on there, especially in terms of air pollution.
Okay, thank you very much, Andy. Okay, thank you very much for today's webinar. Thank you everyone for joining. I will end the webinar there, but obviously we will send around the slides and also a link to the recording of the webinar today as well. All right, thank you everyone for your time, and goodbye.